Hello everyone, it's Jamarl Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. I've got a question for you. Pretend for the moment that you've had a revolution. You've had a revolution, and you are the enlightened few who are at the top of that particular brain trust in that revolution. Now, you guys are enlightened. You guys are progressives. And let's say leftists. Because, again, the term, let's say leftists. And you say, well, look, we know that not everyone is as enlightened as we are. And because we know not everyone is as enlightened we need to put certain checks and balances in the sphere of government itself, or in our construct of society. It goes beyond government. It supersedes government within the society itself, the fabric of society. Government is an element within a society. Now, how do you do this? How do you do this? So yes, you construct your government. That's great. But in order for that government to be held accountable, the people who are there need to know what the government is doing. I mean, keep in mind, the government itself gets its power. Its power, which is to murder, to kill, to maim, and to detain, from the people who govern it, who they governed. Meaning, the public itself is the people who give up a certain amount of rights for this government to rule and make certain decisions. That consent can be taken away at any time. Meaning, the people need to have the capacity to show their disfavor with the government itself. Government, in this case, is to some degree a servant. Now, that's not the way we experience our government. But you being an enlightened few, you say, well, look, we want that to be the way that people experience our government. So, how do we keep those people informed so they can maintain their consent? How do we let the people know what the government is doing? Can you trust the government itself to tell you what it's doing, particularly when it's doing something that it doesn't necessarily want the people to know? So you say, we need a media. We need some kind of media apparatus that gets information from the government to the people itself, but also to hold the government accountable. We need a fourth estate. We need a fourth estate. Now, the job of that fourth estate is going to be to, A, report information on government, let people know what's going on within their political apparatus, and B, fact check. What's real? What's reality? These guys are saying something, but is what these guys are saying true? Do these guys have a vested interest in lying or obfuscating in order to get something through that they themselves or their particular party would like to accomplish, but that the American public itself may not necessarily want them to accomplish? In order to keep the public informed, because ultimately it's the public responsibility to maintain their government. What I'm getting at is this enlightened few that you happen to be a party of would understand that we're going to be dead and gone at a certain point. It is the public responsibility to maintain this apparatus to which we gave them, and to not let that apparatus get out of control. So yes, the fourth estate is going to be an independent body, and it's going to have teeth. Now, the teeth is for the most part to expose that information to the public, because ultimately it is the public responsibility to handle those matters. In ballot, but like I said, in pitchforks, or yeah, in some cases money, where you're putting money behind something to get somebody out of office, or by revolution, if those other methods aren't necessarily available. I'm just making a point that it is full well the public's responsibility to handle those things. And in order for the public to to actually understand that responsibility and get the information necessary for them to make those choices, you need media. You need a functioning media. Enter Mr. Oblivious, Chuck Todd. Chuck Todd, on a tweet, and that's funny in and of itself, but Chuck Todd makes a very interesting appraisal, a condemnation. He's, to some degree, in a weird and plastic way, waving his fists. Every day for the last week, there has been bad healthcare news for White House, and each day bad news was overshadowed by Trump's tweets. All right. That's true. That's true. Mr. Oblivious. It's like the burglar. Yeah, it's the bumbling detectives tripping over the burglar that just robbed the house. I mean, every day for the last week, there has been bad healthcare news for the White House, and each day that news has been overshadowed by Trump's tweets. Now, you've heard me say I don't like mainstream news. I can't watch it. It's aggravating to me to watch it. Part of the reason that I joke and call Chuck Todd Mr. Oblivious is part of the same reason I dislike mainstream news. They're a mask. They're the wool pulled over the country's eyes. They give one narrative after the next in this almost childlike way of trying to explain to Americans a narrative of what they want them to believe America is, if that makes sense. And much of this stuff, it's not all that truthful in general. So, for instance, when Tulsi Gabbard went to Syria, her and Dennis Kucinich, Tulsi Gabbard gets back and says, we're funding terrorists in Syria, and we are helping to undermine Assad's government. Now, that was mind-blowing, if I'm not mistaken, to Jake Tapper. Now, CNN, with all the vast resources at its disposal, are you telling me it doesn't have the ability to find that out themselves? And why was Jake Tapper blown away when she said this? What is the narrative that Jake Tapper was trying to push that didn't jive with what Tulsi Gabbard was saying? Now, the catch is, what Tulsi Gabbard was saying was true. So why didn't CNN know that? Why didn't they know that? Let's take another one. War policy. Donald Trump fires off missiles. He fires off missiles into Syria. Now, it is an amazing thing to me that nobody asks the question of, is it legal for the president to do that? Why didn't the president wait to see the results of the testing for the Syrian thing, to see what was released, meaning the sarin gas that they accused the Syrian government of releasing? The narrative made no sense, but they accused the Syrian government of releasing. Donald Trump comes out and says, the babies. I'm infinitely upset about the babies, the precious babies. Again, nobody in the media said, well, Mr. Trump, you've killed hundreds of babies yourself just in your drone strikes, those illegal drone strikes. Why is it this set of babies that touched you so? And beyond this set of babies, why wouldn't you wait to get the test results to figure out who actually released the sarin gas? Now, that seems like a natural question to me. Those seem like natural questions to me. Those aren't questions that get asked on CNN and mainstream news. There's a narrative that they want to push. Nobody asks whether or not the strikes were legal. Nobody asks whether he had constitutional justification to do them, whether Congress signed off on it. Nobody asks whether international law allowed it. Off the table. Off the table. Seymour Hersh did an investigation and found out that the sarin gas in the first strike that they accused Assad of releasing was not in fact from Assad. That is most likely was from the rebels themselves. Think about that. So the narrative that was created with that the Assad regime released the sarin strike, with all the vast and infinite resources that CNN has at their disposal, CNN could not figure that out. It took Seymour Hersh to do that. Like, I'm just making this point that much of the news these guys put out is cartoonish. If Chuck Todd is having a conversation with politicians, and those politicians are talking about policy and everything else. And the question doesn't come up about, wait a minute, is it possible that money is influencing the decisions that these guys are making? Is it possible? If you know that 90% of the races in, let's say, House seats, House, Senate, whatever, are won by the side with the most cash. Nobody says, well, wait a minute, if we know that, doesn't that make cash the most important factor in these elections? And in making cash the most important factor in these elections, wouldn't that also make the people who they're getting that cash from that much more important? Being that money can be used to help their campaign if they follow a particular line and do a particular thing, or it can be used to punish their campaign by giving that money to their opponent. Do you understand what I mean? I'm saying certainly CNN has to know that. They have to know that these guys are getting billions of dollars at some points, millions of dollars at other points. They have to know that this politics have moved to the right. And yet these questions don't come up. They maintain a mask. They maintain this image of sorts that doesn't actually exist. That's aggravating me about it. When Chuck Todd is out there and he's doing his quote unquote news, well, it's a mask. It's a mask. It's like the reality of it is this underneath thing that these guys don't talk about. And as you're watching it, you're screaming at television. It's like, certainly you know that's not true. Certainly you know the things that you're saying are not true. I watched this thing where they were scolding Bernie Sanders to some degree. Because Sanders was making his point of talking about the Iraq war and everything else in the context of Trump not having justification of missile strikes. And he's bringing up the Iraq war for a very specific reason. We murdered 1 million Iraqis. Now, mainstream news doesn't really pay attention to that at all. That's off the table. When they hear war drums, they hear war drums. War drums are ratings. Now, I'm making this particular point that what Chuck Todd is saying there is unfortunately true. It's unfortunately true. The question becomes, who is Chuck Todd aiming that at? And let's read it in. Every day for the last week, there's been bad healthcare news to the White House, and each day bad healthcare news was overshadowed by Trump's tweets. All right, fine. It was overshadowed by Trump's tweets. Who is that aimed at? Is Chuck Todd condemning himself and the rest of the media apparatus to which he belongs? Like, is this him saying, this being just immensely introspective on Twitter? We're horrible at what we do. We don't do a good job at producing the news. Or is this Chuck Todd, to some degree, condemning the president, wagging his finger at the president? Every day, man, there's been bad news, and you've been out here on Twitter just saying ridiculous stuff, and we've been covering it. Tell me, Chuck, do you believe that Donald Trump, President of the United States, Donald Trump, reality host, Donald Trump, with his tiny fingers, is also molding the media apparatus? Like, do you believe that? Now, if you don't believe that, then the question becomes, whose responsibility is it to make the determination on what presents for news? Now, I've given you somewhat of a philosophical basis of news in the beginning, meaning this thing that, yes, presents the sides in government, in society, and all this other stuff, but it also acts as the integrity of the process, the public agent, the public prosecutor of sorts. It is the job of the media to get to the bottom of things, not just take what these guys are saying and parroting it, those lines. The truth aspect of it. Yes, this is what they say, but this is the truth. This is reality. If what Chuck Todd is saying is true, and what Chuck Todd is saying is true, what they are fails the media test. Or at least it fails a functioning fourth estate test. You're covering tweets. You're covering presidential tweets. Meaning, the substance of it, millions of people are going to lose their health care. Now, you already have one bad plan, Obamacare, that was a right-wing healthcare plan and was failed. Rates were going up by 50% in some cases. People were still uninsured. Millions of people still uninsured. And after my last experience at the hospital dealing with the whole Obamacare regime, yes, it's a shitty plan. But Republicans looked at that and says, we're going to make it shittier because we're the Republican Party and we don't believe in healthcare. The media, for whatever reason, doesn't look at this and say, wait a minute, these guys are using ideology to shape a plan that is going to deal with people's healthcare. It's the point of healthcare. Healthcare is the point of healthcare to be shaped by ideologies. That doesn't come up. That's off the table. Millions of people are going to lose their healthcare. Millions of people didn't have healthcare. And Chuck Todd is making his condemnation saying, yes, the media establishment to which I myself belong makes the determination to talk about Trump's tweets while millions are going to lose their health care. That's an amazing condemnation of media. And I don't know whether Chuck Todd is saying this from an introspective way of saying we need to do a better job. We suck as media. We don't give people the real information. We present fake news. We present a fake narrative of America. I doubt that's true. What I believe is true is probably he was talking about Donald Trump. And he was wagging his finger at Donald Trump of, let us get us back. We should get back to the news. Trump is not letting us get back to the news because he keeps tweeting. The president can tweet as much as he wants. Who are the ridiculous people who decide that they're going to continuously cover those tweets while other people are going to lose their health care? And this is what I mean when I say they're deciding. You may have 1 billion stories out across the world. As a media apparatus, you are in an ivory tower and you look out at this vast sea of stories and you say, what are we going to use to craft a narrative? What is the narrative that we want to craft? What is the position that we want to take? What do we want to get those people to believe? Now, in doing so, you are making certain decisions on the things to cover versus things to not cover. If you're covering Trump's tweets, imagine all the things that affect people, adversely affect people, that make their lives difficult, problems that are on the horizon. Imagine things that these guys don't talk about because it would adversely affect their own interests, meaning the people who own these media organizations. Because to some degree, the media apparatus is part of the political apparatus. I'm just making this point that of all the stories that you can hit at, many of which are really digging into people and affecting people and are going to adversely affect people. You have a job shortage in this country. Now, they always talk about the stock market and everything else, but the stock market is not the health of the nation. Half the country is in poverty. Literally. It's probably more than half. Now, with the richest country on the planet, half of which is in poverty, you would think that would be a big fucking deal, right? If these guys are the public prosecutors, the watchdogs, the man on the wall, the noble reporter, if that's what these guys are, why isn't that a big deal? You have, 325 million Americans in this country, half of which are in poverty. They're in lack. Their needs aren't being met. If you're the public arbiter of sorts, if you're the integrity, the people who are supposed to be representing us in regards to the information to which you give us, this honest appraisal of reality, how are you not paying attention to that? Why don't you care that half of those people are in poverty? The people who you yourself are supposed to be their voice, in a way, their eyes, in that sense. This is all I'm getting at. The real issues to which affect Americans. These guys are out to lunch. When automated cars. How many taxi drivers do you think are going to be out of work when cars are automated? How many? When those people are out of work, how many people do you think are going to be out of work when stores are automated? Meaning you walk in and walk out and you don't necessarily need cashiers. I'm making this point that this job situation is going to get worse. It's going to get worse. It's not going to get better. The things that are on the horizon, these guys are out to lunch on. The political apparatus in no way is able to deal with these issues, but the media apparatus in no way tells you about it. It doesn't tell you. It doesn't give you any substantive information that would allow you to make certain decisions. It maintains a narrative. It maintains a certain amount of an illusion. I suspect that collusion is because of collusion between these two things. Media and politics, they to some degree depend on one another. Media should be antagonistic towards politics, and this is not what we have. Chuck Todd is being immensely observant in somewhat of a backwards way. Yes, Chuck, you guys, your apparatus, the thing to which you belong to, chose to cover Trump's tweets as opposed to the millions of people who are going to lose their health care in order to give these guys tax cuts. I can't say good job because I don't necessarily know who he aimed the tweet at. If it was aimed at himself, then good job. If you aimed it at Donald Trump, then yes, you're ridiculous. You're ridiculous. And I'll leave it at this, but most of the public dislikes mainstream media. Why do you think that's the case, Chuck? Why do you think that's the case? I mean, how do you get the dislike of most of the public? And do you believe that dislike has something to do with your distance from the public itself? Meaning the thing that you project is not the thing to which they live. And so there is a disparity between what you say, how you behave, how you look, you polished people, versus the reality to which they persist. I would imagine that breeds a certain amount of distrust. And yes, the parties has something to do with this, but this is also about you. Fewer and fewer people read your papers. Fewer and fewer people watch your shows. Independent media, for the most part, has been ferocious. So much so that you guys have had to comment on things that is going on in independent media. That wouldn't have happened 5 years ago. That's happening now. Part of the reason of your irrelevance or your ensuing irrelevance is to some degree, Chuck, because of your obliviousness. There's information out there. There's real news. There's things that affect people's lives. That's information that people want. They get sick of the mask, these polished images that you guys create. They want reality. Yes, there are going to be some on independent media who's out to lunch. But whether they're out to lunch on the wild-eyed things that they may be spitting, there's also guys out there who are trying to do their best to be with integrity and give real information for people to make honest and earnest decisions on their world. They give you their point of view up front. My point of view is humanism. That's my point of view. I want people to be free. The choices I make and the positions that I take are probably going to revolve around that. That's my stake in the ground. You guys are pretending that you guys are objective. You guys are neutral. You just present narratives uncritically. The most ridiculous aspect that I think I've seen as almost a criticism on itself, even though they don't necessarily recognize it as so. Fact checkers. When the news organizations, the media organizations had to get fact checkers, and you ask yourself, well, what's your job? What's your job? Why do you, as a media organization, need to get fact checkers? It's amazing. It's amazing. I'll leave it at that. I'll leave it at that. I'm just saying, man, I greatly dislike mainstream media, and it's for the reasons I gave earlier. I'm not going to repeat it. They spin these and weave these narratives, and it's like these things are so detached from reality. And as you're listening to Chuck Todd talk to somebody, and you're thinking to yourself, certainly they know that the things they're saying aren't true, or at the very least, so little context that anybody who's watching who doesn't necessarily pay attention to politics would have a skewed or really poor idea of what's going on. I have these conversations with my mom, and you're unweaving this stuff that the media apparatus is saying. You've seen me do things where I'm looking at the media and I'm losing my shit at, because it's like there's a narrative that we want to promote, and we want to be very specific to the narrative to which we want to promote. I just wanted a little bit more context, and I want more honesty. Sometimes both sides can be right. Sometimes both sides can be wrong. Sometimes one side could be completely wrong and the other side could be a little bit wrong. There are degrees in the way that you're analyzing the way people are talking about things. I don't see that degree per se on mainstream news. I don't see it. I don't see it at all. I'll leave it at that. All right, guys. If you enjoy the content, feel free to share, write, subscribe. You can always support the work through Patreon or PayPal. Thank you.